Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Saturday, November 9th, 2024, and you are watching The Rundown, Episode 7, my weekly podcast, or sometimes weekly podcast. Took a little break for the past few weeks, but my sometimes weekly podcast where I talk about all things related to video game news and the culture surrounding it, as things have been kind of crazy as of late. And we'll get into why that is, at least for today's episode anyways. I'm your host, as always, Corrupt Ronan. Sometimes I might have guests on the show to, talk about certain topics and things like that if I want to get a secondary opinion about this stuff. But that's neither here nor there. You can check this out on my YouTube channel. These episodes go the archives of these go up there, obviously, as I stream on both Twitch and YouTube, but the archives will remain on YouTube. So for those of you who want to check out the previous episodes, you can see those up in the live section of my YouTube channel. This episode is not going to be live on YouTube as well for the sole purpose of OBS and me not getting along too well today. So trying to do a dual stream where we restream to YouTube as well is just not happening right now. But the archive will definitely be up on YouTube for those that might have missed it and want to catch it there, or prefer watching things on YouTube in general, which I totally understand, especially with the way things have been going on Twitch as of late. But not to drone on about that. For today's episode, boy, we got quite a bit to talk about, especially in regards to a little game called Dragon Age The Veilguard, which I'm sure you've seen plenty of in the news as of late. But have you really been hearing the truth about what's going on with that game? Probably not from the what people call legacy media or access media, at least. And we're going to talk a little bit about that for today's episode. Plus, we also got news about the lawsuit with Nintendo and Pocketpair and what that means for the future of PAL World and the studio in general. And then we also have news about Sony and their commitment to single-player games and how Concord has really kind of reset the company's ambitions going into the future as a whole. And unfortunately, how they continue to display that they might not have learned the correct lessons when it comes to what happened with Concord. But we'll get into that as well. Plus, there's also rumors about Rocksteady potentially trying to salvage Suicide Squad with a few characters that they're bringing back this time, and what they aim for the future for Warner Brother Games and Warner Brother Studios. But we'll get into that as well. So, without further ado, enough with the preamble. Let's go ahead and... You might have heard that I actually have, I've written down my notes on actual paper for this episode, so this should be interesting. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Dragon Age, shall we? I'm gonna go ahead and well, first of all, I'll try to preface this by saying, so like I said at the beginning, you might have seen a lot of news about Dragon Age, specifically around the launch, where access media or legacy media has kind of rallied behind this game, saying that it's a great success and that the sales were amazing, and trying to own the chuds because this game was the game that showed them just how wrong they are. I believe there was one, let's see here, pull up that tweet. Let's see if I can pull up the old Jason Schreier tweet, shall I? Tweet? Jason Schreier tweet. All right, I got it. Now we're good to go. So yeah, they kind of rallied behind this game in a significant way when it came out because they thought they figured the sales were amazing. They saw the game skyrocket to the top of the Steam charts, and the amount of concurrent players that were playing it, they saw it. He reached an all-time peak, and a lot of news media were talking about how it's the best-selling Dragon Age game or EA game on Steam. And when you listen to them specifically, you would think that Dragon Age The Veilguard was just a massive success, and that the quote-unquote chuds were just wrong about DEI and wokeness in video games, at least according to them. As time went on and people started digging into what's been happening with that game, they realized that, actually, you know what? Maybe what they're telling us isn't quite true. And a few content creators have kind of gotten out there with insider sources at BioWare talking about what exactly went down or what is currently going down with that game as of late. So what's the truth behind the sales of Dragon Age The Veilguard? Got an article here. Let's go over there real quick. From parkplace.com. And this comes off the heels of a video by the YouTuber Endymion, who talks about his insider source giving him the truth about what happened with Dragon Age The Veilguard and why the game's success is not quite as it seems. Let me go ahead and make this bigger on screen for you guys to see this as well. Although I haven't highlighted, so how could you miss it, right? So, he says, and this is part of his video, and I quote, he says, not only did the source share that the game's sales were only around 500,000 copies, that's 500,000 copies in its first week, but he also revealed that players are refunding the game in droves. And Devion stated, as I was told by the same source, BioWare's hire-ups believed the game would skyrocket past 100,000 concurrent players on Steam during launch. It didn't, of course, and as you can see over here, the game topped out at 89,000 players for its all-time peak when the game released. Now, why is this significant? Because at an all-time peak, within the first week, usually what happens is, as you can see in this graph, that as time goes on, those numbers tend to drop off as people have either played through the game or perhaps didn't like the game and start refunding it. So you can see the peaks of this graph are decreasing slowly over time. Goes on to say, apparently in terms of the EA subscription service, where you pay a monthly fee to play their catalog of games, which Veilguard is a part of, this offer only ended up pulling in around 20,000 players on Origin, as I'm told, which is hardly anything for a game that, again, needs far more than this to succeed, which he's correct about. This game was in development for a total of roughly 10 years, and the estimated budget behind it is between $250 million and $300 million. Okay. Now, for a game that costs roughly $60 to $70, in order for them to break even in terms of how much money they spent on this game to get themselves back into the black, they would have to have sold between 4 and 5 million copies of the game. That's just to break even. Okay. That's not to make a profit. And as anybody who runs a business will tell you, that a business does not survive simply by breaking even all the time. You have to make a profit. Now, how do we know that this game didn't sell that many copies? Well, when you look at the patterns over the industry, let's take a game like Black Myth Wukong, for example. That game sold over 2 million copies within the first few days of its release. And when it hit that mark, the developers were more than happy to shout that out from the rooftops all over social media that the game had sold that many copies. And that number continued to grow over time, and they continued to talk about that. When Space Marine 2 came out, that game sold roughly 2 million copies within the first few days of its release, or within the first week, and the developers, again, were happy to shout that out from the rooftops. When Dragon Ball Sparking Zero came out, and that game sold millions of copies, the developers were more than happy to shout that out from the rooftops, all over social media. When Metaphor ReFantazio came out, and it sold over 1 million copies, the developers were once again more than happy to shout that out from the rooftops all over social media. What did you hear from Dragon Age The Veilguard? Nothing. Crickets. Not a peep about the game's sales from its first week. Now, in the beginning, when everybody in Access Media was so happy about the game supposedly selling well, they wanted to shout that out from the rooftops. The Access Media was doing that, not the developers. The Access Media. Take it from one Jason Schreier over here. He goes on Twitter in the first few days of the game's release and says, "Go woke, straight to the Steam charts." A tweet that he would later delete when the news came out about the game not selling all that well. His owning the chuds seems to have backfired. But the article goes on that in terms of refunds, currently the game had at least 30,000 refunds in the past few days, which is not good for your game that has barely sold 500,000 copies, to be hemorrhaging players like this, Devion said, which is correct. You can't, that is a pretty significant number of refunds. There was some, we'll say, misinformation floating around out there about the number of refunds the game had in that first week, as somebody was using effectively a Steam tool to indicate that the game was having an astronomical number of refunds. And I think that number was roughly the 200,000 range, which didn't really make a lot of sense considering that the game hadn't really sold that many copies in that amount of time. So if you see anybody quoting that number online or using that as some sort of factual source, regard that as not true, because at the time that that happened, there was no way that that game could have had over 200,000 refunds, considering it didn't sell that many copies. That particular number, in terms of refunds, was the amount of refunds across the entirety of Steam itself, and not just specifically for Dragon Age. So when you see that, regard that as quote unquote fake news, as some people would call it. But to continue on with this, there were also more lies that were put out about this game in Access Media, talking about how the game was the top-selling EA game on Steam and how it beat Dragon Age Inquisition. But what's wrong with that particular information, of course, is the fact that Dragon Age Inquisition did not release first on Steam. In fact, the game didn't come to Steam until 6 years after it released. Meaning that most of the people that wanted to play the game had already played it on other platforms. Probably Origin, probably on console, so on and so forth. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make that comparison to a game that was over, well, now, how many years now? 10 years old now? A game that's over 10 years old and did not come to Steam first. They also tried to pull that shit with Jedi Survivor as well, which is also untrue. It is one of the first few games that actually released on Steam day and date, since EA made the change recently to also start releasing their games on Steam after, Jesus, how many years of them not putting their games on Steam because of the fallout they had with Valve in regards to DLC on the platform? So when you see people talking about that, also regard that as misinformation, because it's also not true. And in the case of, let's say, BioWare, and when it comes to EA in general, most of their games, when they typically sell well, because BioWare has a history of this, they typically tend to release DLC for those games to add a little more context or a little more, flesh out the game's world a bit more. You look at games like Inquisition, for example. That game also had plenty of DLC to follow onto it, to kind of flesh out the game's world and add a bit more to it. You look at the Mass Effect series. That game had a ton of DLC across the entire trilogy, for example, in regards to showing you just how successful those games actually were. Mass Effect Andromeda, no DLC. And that game was obviously raked across the coals in terms of people hating that game. Understandably so. With Dragon Age The Veilguard, the developers were very forward about the idea of this game having no DLC. In fact, it almost seems like they're trying to bury the game in terms of its press and PR, because, and perhaps this might be just the fact that N7 Day has already passed, and for those who don't know, N7 Day is basically BioWare's celebration for Mass Effect, for what's called the N7 program in the game for specific soldiers that are part of the Alliance. So they celebrated that this week, and all of the general talk about about Veilguard has kind of fallen by the wayside in regards to just EA in general. And so much so to the point where the developers of this game have been quickly pulled off to work on the next Mass Effect that they announced years back. Which, considering just what BioWare is now, and while we think of just how BioWare has fallen these days, specifically in regards to Dragon Age, BioWare died a long time ago. I would say BioWare, in my opinion, BioWare started dying at the end of Mass Effect 3. The BioWare that we knew and loved was no longer the BioWare that we knew and loved. This was something different, a different entity. And you saw that drop off with games like Mass Effect Andromeda, Anthem, their live service game that never really panned out. And now this, which also didn't quite pan out. So to have this exact team working on the next Mass Effect, I'm sure instills no one with confidence. And at this point, if they were going to shut BioWare down, I would have preferred they have done it before they got their hands on the next Mass Effect. And perhaps that will still happen considering how poorly the game is sold overall. Now, the 500,000 copies thing, who knows? Maybe that's just a PC platform thing. And maybe it sold way more copies on the console front. But we don't really have any information about that. And again, the developers have not been out there talking about the game's sales. It's been over a week. You think they would have done that by now, which they haven't. Considering developers are more than happy to do that when a game does so well. So that tells you all you need to know. But obviously this game has been embroiled in the general culture war as a whole. And it's unfortunate to see just how, I guess you could say, general access media has been trying to thwart the idea of gamers basically understanding what they want. And it's really weird to have the access media being out there as quote-unquote representatives of the gaming community while also hating the game community at the same time. To be this out of touch with what the gaming community wants is the reason why a lot of legacy and access media today is falling by the wayside. See Kotaku, for example, which just saw a recent round of layoffs. For good reason, when you consider what Kotaku is and just the kind of people that run that website. The gaming industry or the gaming landscape these days has changed. And considering what's been going on as of lately, at least in regards to a certain United States election, you're going to see a lot of those sweeping changes happen very, very quickly overall. You probably might see some people double down on the same bullshit that's gotten them in this mess in the first place because they still believe that they're going to teach people a lesson. But what they don't understand is, and perhaps this could be applied to the reason why they lost the election as well. When you continue to demonize, call people racist, bigots, homophobes, transphobes, everyday, average, regular people, it is no surprise why you are seeing what's happen right now. Whether it be the shutdown of studios, the lack of sales for games, the loss of an election. When you continue to demonize the general public, the average everyday citizen, don't be surprised when they have no reason to be on your side. Anyways, that's enough of Dragon Age. Let's talk about the next bit of news here in regards to Nintendo. So what's going on with this Nintendo Pocketpair situation? Let me just go back here real quick as I do this stuff on the fly. We do it live, baby. We do it live. There we go. All right, let's put that back up on the screen. So this Nintendo Pocketpair lawsuit kind of took place or kind of kicked off back in September of this year when Power World announced that Nintendo was coming after them with tons of litigation. And we didn't quite have the details about what they might be coming after them for. It was mentioned before that Nintendo likely wouldn't be able to find an edge on them in regards to copyright infringement, no matter how closely their pals in their game resemble Pokemon as a whole. They simply weren't able to come after them from that angle. So what did Nintendo do? They came after them from a patent infringement angle. And what people speculated at the time was that they might be coming after them for what they could perceive as a literal copy of the Pokeball and catching mechanic in the game, which admittedly, the mechanic is very similar to how Pokeballs work in Pokemon. So, according to Pocketpair, they came out with this recently in a statement. They confirmed that there were 3 patents that were at the center of this lawsuit that Nintendo had filed and are fighting them for. Let's talk about this patent, shall we? First patent is patent number 7545191. And bear with me because these patents are incredibly wordy. And when you read them out loud, it can be hard to determine what they're trying to say. But I'll try my best to explain it to you. This patent is determining in a first mode an aiming direction in a virtual space based on a second operation input and causing, in a second mode, a player character to shoot in the aiming direction an item that affects a field character placed on a field in the virtual space based on a third operation input. Based on the second operation input, the aiming direction is determined, and based on the third operation input, the player character is caused to shoot the battle character in the aiming direction. From what I understand this patent is referring to basically the player being able to shoot or aim something at a character in a virtual environment by aiming at them in a secondary function. Like let's say you go into a second person mode, almost like what you do in Resident Evil when you aim a gun and you're shooting at the enemy. Similar to that. The second patent here, and whatever, it's fuck the number, it's gonna say the patent. A sighting direction with a virtual space is determined based on a second operation input. In a first mode, a player character is allowed to release an item affecting a field character disposed on a field within a virtual space toward the sighting direction on the basis of a third operation input. Sighting direction is determined based on a second operation input in second mode, and the play character is allowed to release a fighting character who fights towards the sighting direction on the basis of the third operation input. Basically, the idea of throwing out an item onto the field that releases, or basically effectively releases another character to fight another character that is on the field, effectively, which would refer to Pokemon being released from their Pokeballs to fight other Pokemon. It's kind of what they're referring to in this one. The third patent, and this one I think is perhaps, well, whatever. A lot of these patents are extremely vague in a lot of ways and can be applied to many different games and mechanics. But this one, I mean, you can kind of apply this last one to a lot of games. But again, I'll talk about why Power World is at the center of this in just a second. In one example of a game program, a riding object for ground or aerial riding or an aerial riding object is selected by a selection program, and the player character is made to ride on the selected riding object. In the case the player character riding on the aerial riding object moves toward the ground, a change is automatically made to a state in which the player character rides on the riding object for ground, so the player character can move on the ground. They're referring to the fact that, like, let's take, for example, the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, for example. You can ride Pokemon in that game. They can either be in the air, they can either be in the water, they can also be on land. And basically, the Pokemon, they're referring to the Pokemon being able to effectively automatically change themselves into different modes to ride on different environments. But the whole idea is being able to ride on Pokemon, which you can ride on the pals in Pal World as well. These are the patents that they're coming after them for. Now, in many cases, when you see Nintendo coming after someone for a lawsuit, a lot of people tend to fold, they settle, they stop doing whatever it is they're doing. But from what we're seeing so far, is that Pocketpair intends to continue fighting this. See, where was that at? Hold on. What did they say exactly? Yeah, here we go. Little statement right here. Let me highlight that. Let me just make sure I can read that properly. Let me highlight that real quick. Let me highlight that. So, Pocketpair also revealed that the injunction calls for 10 million yen, 5 million yen paid out to Nintendo, and 5 million paid out to the Pokemon Company. Now, when they hit him with this lawsuit, they were the 60 million yen thing that roughly translates to roughly, I believe it was $65,000, which for between both companies, that is a drop in the fucking bucket in terms of money. But the kicker with this whole thing is the injunction part, which from my understanding, the injunction allows Nintendo to block or even stop sales of Pal World completely should they win this lawsuit. And that's what Nintendo is trying to do. It's not about the money. It's about them trying to send a message and stop Pal World from selling. Which a lot of people speculated in the first place, because there's a lot of games out there that do very similar things that what Pal World does. But the problem with Pal World is that it is the most successful game to do this. And you know that you've got something on your hands when your game is enough to make Nintendo flinch. And that's what they did. They flinched, and now they're coming after them. So who knows how this goes? This thing is kind of moving at a bit of a snail's pace, and it probably will continue to do so in the future. Either Nintendo wins this case, and you end up seeing either Palworld try to attempt to change this mechanic so that it has no resemblance to any of the patents that Nintendo has listed here, or you end up seeing Palworld being taken off the market. Or you may see Palworld continue to be on the market, but now they have to license the Pokeball ID out to Nintendo and pay them a licensing fee to do so. Which, either way, this all works out for Nintendo at the end of the day. Or this could be a case where Palworld, because it seems like they're going to continue to fight this, so Palworld probably feels confident in their ability to do so. Perhaps they have an edge in that the idea of these patents is incredibly vague and don't really have all that many specifications as to what Palworld has been doing with their mechanics in their games, and they think they have an edge in that case to fight back against this. But my thing is, and a lot of other people have said this as well, is that Nintendo would not have come after them about this if they were not confident that they could win. And the chances of Nintendo winning this thing is very high. Palworld and Pocketpair may have made a lot of money off of Palworld, considering how many copies it sold. But Nintendo has been around for decades. They've got plenty of money to go around, and they will spend as much money as they need to drag this thing out and to fight it for as long as they can. So the outcome is up in the air. But the whole idea of Nintendo trying to weave their hands into this to stop Pocketpair in general, don't be surprised. Like, we'll see where this goes, but man. I mean, there's been some leaks about the next Pokemon game from the Pokemon Company with the big Pokemon or Game Freak leak that came out as of late. That is, I don't know if anybody's been paying attention to that shit, but that's been kind of wild for those leaks that came out of that. But some of the leaks that came out about that have been indicating that they have clearly been paying attention to Palworld, and some of the mechanics that they're talking about in their next game are similar to that of what Palworld has. So obviously that game has had a pretty significant effect on Pokemon as a whole. And I was watching an episode of, Side Scrollers, and they were kind of talking about Nintendo. And one of their guests on the show, and I apologize for getting his name, but he made a statement about Nintendo that I think kind of rings true. He says, one of the reasons we love Nintendo is also one of the reasons we hate Nintendo. Nintendo has a lot of love, respect, and care and protection for their IPs. And the result of that ends up being that you see a lot of quality games that come out for their IPs. I wouldn't say all their games have been quality, but more often than not, they've been pretty good. Because they treat their properties with the proper respect. They put real effort into making them. But because of that, they are also very, very litigious when it comes to their IPs as well. So if anybody has any idea of trying to copy, steal, borrow, emulate, whatever it might be, Nintendo's going to go after you. And this all works out for them because at the end of the day, if there's no one out there doing what they do, then the only way you can get that kind of experience is playing it on Nintendo. If no one out there can make a Pokemon game, then the only way you can play Pokemon is to get a Nintendo console and play it that way. That works out for them. And there's a lot of people out there that are more than happy to do that. But it's a double-edged sword. Because when you don't have that competition, you are much more likely to stagnate in terms of improvement, iteration, and innovation in your games. And that is what Pokemon has been for a very, very long time. It has been stagnant for a very long time. Only now, as Nintendo decided that they want to try to do something to bolster people's enthusiasm back up for Pokemon in general by making some actual real changes and taking big risks. But that's only after a game like Palworld comes out and basically makes them blink. So as of right now, it's business as usual for both of them. Palworld just came out on PS5 as of recently. and the game is still selling in Japan as well. And Japan is kind of where this whole patent thing has been filed in the first place. Although most of the patents are kind of similar to what they filed here in the U.S., but I believe it's one of the patents that was filed in Japan. But either way, like with Pocketpair being in Japan and also doing business in the United States as well, they can get them on both. They can fight this on all three fronts, I guess you could say. So we'll see where this goes. It's funny to see how Nintendo has been about this whole thing, but it's also interesting to see just how, I guess, that's the word I'm looking for, direct they are in regards to protecting their intellectual property, and how cutthroat. There we go, cutthroat. They are in trying to get people to smite people down in regards to borrowing mechanics from their games, especially those that have been immensely successful, like Power World. And there was also the Power World mobile game that just came out recently as well, or not came out, but they announced a deal to do that as well. They announced a deal with Sony recently. So this whole thing is just it's a complete mess, and we can either see this whole thing being settled tomorrow, or it might take years from now to hear anything else about what's going on. But either way, got to be paying close attention to what's happening in the future for this lawsuit, because this whole thing might send waves throughout the entire industry as a whole. And I don't know. And if Pocketpair ends up losing this thing and they have to pull Power World off the shelves, I imagine a lot of people are going to be very, very unhappy with Nintendo. At least the people with common sense. You got those fanboys out there that are actually rooting for Nintendo in this case and hoping that Nintendo will eventually end up bringing down Power World because of this. In fact, a lot of this whole thing kind of kicked off because a lot of people out there were effectively reaching out to Nintendo to do something about Power World. Which is crazy to think about. That kind of, I guess, loyalty to a company where you're willing to rat out some other company and try to force them to do something about it because you think they're a threat to your company or the company that you like. That is some crazy brand loyalty that I do not understand and can't wrap my head around at all, to be completely honest with you. Anyways, moving on from Power World, let's talk about what's going on with Sony, shall we? So, in a recent interview, Sony talks about how they want to basically reaffirm their commitment to single-player games. And they also came out there and talked about how they likely say they should have done some user testing and internal evaluation earlier on a game like Concord. Basically saying like, hey, we probably should have gotten some real feedback about this game early in development before we put out what we put out, and waited far too late to realize that these character designs and this game as a whole, this shit ain't gonna work. This shit ain't gonna work. And that's exactly what happened. And to be fair, they're correct about that. However, even with this knowledge, they prove once again that they didn't quite learn. While they may have learned some of the correct lessons about what happened with Concord, they've also learned a lot of the wrong lessons in regards to Concord as well. We come down here, this particular part of the article, and the COO and CFO, Totoki Hiroki, says listen to this part of the article, says he went on to point fingers at Sony's siloed organization and Concord's release window, which may have caused cannibalization because Concord launched in August, not long after Black Myth Wukong. So they're still pointing fingers at the idea that the whole reason why this game didn't sell well is not just because of, people not caring for the character designs and the idea of a lot of what people call, what the woke pandering bullshit in games that you see a lot of today. People didn't care for it. Like when Concord was announced, there was no interest, period. They had an open beta for the game. No one played it. The interest just wasn't there. There was nothing about that game that was appealing. And even worse, you had a lot of the woke bullshit in the game that turned people off. A lot of people will make the argument about, people just freak out about the pronouns, and they just hate the idea of you being able to pick pronouns, and which is probably the most over reductive and maliciously disingenuous argument that I've heard in regards to this stuff. It's not necessary, because when you break it down, and again, this is me actually trying to pay attention to this shit and get an understanding of what's going on here. When you break it down, it's not about the pronouns themselves that people have a problem with. The problem that people have is the shit behind the pronouns, the mindset behind the people that put the pronouns in the game in the first place. It's not about the pronouns themselves. Again, like I said before, pattern recognition is a hell of a thing. And if there's one thing about human beings that separates them from the rest of the animal kingdom, it's pattern recognition and opposable thumbs. Pattern recognition is a hell of a thing. And people have noticed that whenever you see the pronoun shit, whether it be in video games or social media profiles, whatever it might be, there is a certain mindset that follows behind that ends up putting the shit in games that people do not care for. So what did they see when they saw the pronouns? They said, oh shit, this game is woke. And what a lot of the industry underestimates is the amount of people that do not care for that shit. Because it's the mindsets behind those pronouns for the reasons why you get a game like Concord, where none of the characters are appealing. None of the characters are appealing whatsoever. They're the reason why you get a Dragon Age The Veilguard that is heavy-handed in gender identity and social politics that people do not agree with. To the point where people that would generally be on that side of the aisle championing this shit even had to call it out themselves. As saying it was way heavy-handed. It actually hurts the overall message. So it's not about the pronouns themselves. It's about the mindsets behind them. And a lot of these industry higher-ups are taking some of the wrong lessons from this shit. Blaming it on, blaming Concord's failure on the fact that we were charging $40 at the beginning, so we probably shouldn't have done that. It's like, it wasn't about the money. There just wasn't any interest in the game. You could have made it free to play all you want to, and I guarantee you that game still wouldn't have done well. So it's clear that Sony has seen some of the feedback about this game, and they've taken some of that into account. They are still willing to point fingers at other things besides that for the reason why the game didn't do so well. You sit there and you blame it on Black Myth Wukong, which, to be fair, Black Myth Wukong did come out literally days before Concord did. That is, in fact, true, and sold way more copies. But what I tend to find hilarious, at least at the time that people were praising Black Myth Wukong for its sales and the kind of game it was, is that there were a lot of that's what I'm looking for. It's dissenters, we'll say. Dissenters that were saying, oh, well, the game might have sold well, but that's just in China. It only sold that well in China, which is true. But what I find, I guess, particularly bad about that statement is almost as if they're implying that Chinese gamers don't matter. You tell me that if a game does well in China, that's irrelevant because what? It's China? Chinese gamers don't matter? Since when? Because last I checked, the Asian market in general is the biggest demographic in the industry. That and the Middle Eastern market, or the Saudi Arabian market. Those are the two biggest markets in this industry. So to sit there and be like, oh, well, it just sold well in China, so it doesn't matter, that is ridiculous. So first it was, well, it doesn't matter because the game sold well in China, but now it matters that the game sold well? So much so that you think it cannibalized your other game? Like completely tone deaf. And he goes to say, and then going forward in our own titles, in third-party titles, we have many different windows. We want to be able to select the right and optimal window that we can deploy them so we can deploy them on our platform without cannibalization. So we can maximize their performance in terms of title launches. That's all I have. So, in other words, at the end of this, still taking all the wrong lessons. When it comes down to it, this industry as a whole has proven themselves to be tone deaf. And a lot of that some of that may not have to do with the fact that you have a lot of hardcore activists that are trying to influence the way games are going. That's not to say that is not a significant part of what's been going on as of late. But a lot of cases, it's just that the higher ups are completely out of touch. And what I found particularly interesting about this as well, about the idea of it being a siloed organization, as it says here in these highlights that I have here, there was some news that came out about Ghost of Yote. And one of the, I think it was Endymion, had a insider source at Sony talking about how when the game was revealed at the State of Play about a month or so ago, that the higher-ups at Sony were kind of pissed off about it because apparently they didn't know that the game was not about Jin Sakai. The higher-ups believed that whatever Sucker Punch was working on more than likely was Ghost of Tsushima 2. When our friend here says that Sony is a siloed organization, it kind of lends a little bit of credibility to the idea that perhaps Sony Japan really didn't know the truth about what Sucker Punch was working on. Especially when they don't talk to each other like that on a regular basis or communicate like that. So there's a very real possibility that Sony Japan was indeed pissed off about it because they were expecting a Ghost of Tsushima 2 instead of what we're getting. And again, that would be PlayStation's fault. That's not to say that Ghost of Yote is going to be bad. We don't know. Too early to say. But a lot of people were pretty upset about that. And people tried to come after me in the comments of the video that I made about it, saying that people's apprehension around the game was justified. And I still stand behind that. It is indeed justified to be apprehensive about that game. Because again, much like the pronoun shit that I just got done talking about in regards to Concord and Dragon Age The Veilguard, people have noticed patterns and they have been willing to associate a correlation to that of the mindsets of the studios behind them when they do stuff like this. Now, we could all be completely wrong about Sucker Punch. Ghost of Yote comes out and it's an amazing game. In fact, that's what I would want to happen. But considering the patterns of this industry as a whole, confidence ain't that high. And when I said cautiously optimistic in that video, I still stand by that. People say, well, they haven't really given us a reason to think they might do something like that. Like, but what has changed? I don't think anything changed in Sucker Punch Studio. And while I understand that sentiment, I think people tend to underestimate just how much a studio can change in the course of 5 years. Mass Effect 3 came out in 2012? Dragon Age Inquisition came out in 2014. A game that was divisive for many about what it was, the content, so on and so forth. A lot of people liked it, a lot of people hated it. But that's 2 years. Mass Effect 2 came out in 2010. Mass Effect 3 was 2012. 2 years. For the studio to change enough to make changes like that people hate. And people hated the ending of Mass Effect 3. And again, justified, considering what that ending was. So no, it is very easy to think about how things could still be the same because, the studio's still the same. We don't have any information about how it could change. Totally understandable. I totally get that. But 5 years, a lot happens in 5 years at a studio. Do not underestimate just how much a studio can change in 5 years. And a lot of the time, it's not for the better. It seems like Sony's still committed to single-player games going into the future, and I think the failure of Concord has kind of reset them on that path, because they were really hoping that Concord was going to be their big thing to come out this year. They had a lot of confidence in that, and I think the shutdown and the failure of that game really hit them hard, to the point where they don't really have a whole lot going on for the rest of this year. The PlayStation 5 Pro just came out, but that's just a half-step iteration console, which doesn't matter much if you don't have really any games to play on it. I mean, it's great that it boosts the visuals and frame rate of games that you already own, but those are games you already own. Games you've already played. And there's not a whole lot of those either. Their next big release from them in general, like from what I've only heard, is that it's Ghost of Yote. Everything else is like third-party stuff. And even then, there's rumors that Ghost of Yote might get delayed. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, this is crazy. The gaming industry as a whole is in desperate need of a reset. And based on what I've been seeing as of late, since just a few days after the election, there's a lot of companies out there that are already hitting the reset button. I'll give you an example. There was an ad that I saw pop up on YouTube, and maybe this is just my first time seeing the ad, and perhaps this ad has been around for a while, okay? But I just saw this ad today on YouTube. And the ad, how did the ad go? It was like, stop. You need to stop putting on all these layers for the winter. You're a man. Buy one of our new multi-layered jackets. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, wouldn't most people today consider that ad kind of quote unquote toxically masculine? Since when do you see an ad talking about you being a man and being tough and being strong in today's age? Again, perhaps that ad has been around for a while and I'm only just seeing it now for the first time. But that made me take a minute to step back and be like, what the fuck is going on here? Now, there's no way those changes are happening that fast. Although I wouldn't be surprised. So we'll see what happens. Riker says, Insomniac saved Sony again? Well, we'll see what happens, because I don't even think Insomniac can do it now. You consider what happened with Spiderman 2? That game cost $350 million and it still didn't break even? Even that game didn't break even. They're working on that Wolverine game, and the confidence in that has dropped significantly, especially when that major hack came out. And they released all of the hackers released all that shit that came out that included a playable build of that Wolverine game, which you might still be able to find footage of on the internet. I kid you not, there was a broken playable version of that Wolverine game out there that was floating around the internet. And yeah, let's just say the confidence kind of dropped off significantly with that one. And considering who works at Insomniac now, and what they did with Spider-Man 2, do I need to pull up that clip with Brian, what's his name, saying, we know people didn't like the Mary Jane segments in the first game, but basically fuck those people. We increased the amount of Mary Jane segments in the second game because fuck you, we're going to put it in there anyways. I don't care what you like. We like it. Let's see, what is it? What do we got here? Look at that. Is it on YouTube? It's probably on YouTube. Let's check it out there. Oh, can I not find it? Oh, I can't find it now. It's probably not on the internet anymore. But yeah, there's that clip going around of, I think it was on IGN talking about that stuff. It was either on Kind of Funny or IGN talking about injecting stuff into the game that people don't like and then trying to make them like that stuff. And he said that in regards to the Mary Jane segments that people didn't like in the first game. Give people stuff they want so you can inject things that maybe they aren't familiar with or maybe they don't know they want, but make them like that. And instead of being like, okay, people don't like this shit and perhaps not doing it for the second game, you ramped up doing more of it in the second game. only to make people make fun of you even more for doing that shit. And then there's the whole the spoilers for those who haven't played Spider-Man 2. Brace yourself for this. There was the segment in the game where Mary Jane she gets infected with the symbiote and she becomes Scream, which is a comic book character as well, who actually isn't Mary Jane in the comics, but whatever. They made Harry Venom in this one, so why not, right? But anyways, during that entire fight sequence, it was the most trauma, like guilt-trippy, trauma-dumping sequence I've ever seen in a video game. The developers deliberately going out of their way to make Peter feel like look like and feel like a bad person for being a superhero. It was incredibly cringy, and it made me almost want to turn the damn game off. And you have to play through that section because it's a boss fight, and you have to listen to that exchange the entire goddamn time. And I'm thinking to myself, and it was so bad that I think even DJ was there that day, and he was like, "Are you kidding me? So like, the man's supposed to feel bad because he has superpowers and you don't?" It was that ridiculous. But those are the kinds of people that are behind these games now. Yeah, I can't. I can't. It might be a Twitter clip out there that I have to find, but I'm not do that right now. I'm in the middle of the podcast. No time for that shit right now. But that's where we're at. And you can't figure out why people are pushing back against this shit. You can't figure out why the games aren't selling. You can't figure out why people are tired of it. You can't figure out why people, when they see pronouns in a game, they just lose all interest. Because you don't want to figure that out. You don't want to know why it is this is happening. You just want to point fingers at everybody but yourself. Since I'm muted for the Spider-Man spoilers, totally fine. I get it. So until you stop pointing fingers at everybody else and do your own self-reflection, game developers, this shit is going to continue to happen. Your Dragon Ages are going to continue to fail. Your Concords are going to continue to fail. Studios are going to continue to get shut down. People are going to continue to get laid off. And if you're okay with that, by all means, because from what I understand, at least in the gaming industry, is that people don't fail downward. They somehow fail upward. I would not be surprised if people that worked at Firewalk Studios end up at some other company with either director or CEO positions. And they seem intent on jumping into beloved franchises and burning them to the ground. Which is why I have no confidence in the next Mass Effect. And why I have no confidence in our next topic. Brace yourselves, folks. So, from that Park Place, says, Rocksteady and Warner Brothers rumored to remake Batman Arkham Asylum after Suicide Squad killed the Justice League's financial disaster. So this comes from the content creator and YouTuber Vera Dark. She apparently has an insider source. She says, confirm, Rocksteady is adding Deathstroke and the real Batman, the one we originally wanted to see, into Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League for the last 2 seasons. It seems they're desperate to get players back in the game, but it's too late. We go over here to the actual page, shall we? What else you say? Warner Bros. Recently spoke about the franchises they like to focus on in DC. Specifically, Batman was mentioned. The same sources told me that told me layoffs were incoming months ago and were correct. Tell me they've internally greenlit a remake of Batman Asylum and will potentially be continuing the Arkhamverse with the Origins voice cast. They recently got back together and did Arkham Shadows with Camouflage. Now, Arkham Shadows has gotten pretty decent reviews, but when you consider these reviews came from the same people that said that Dragon Age The Veilguard was a 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 game, that ain't saying a whole lot. It kind of shows why people have lost faith in legacy or access media. So take that with massive grains of salt. But when you consider what Rocksteady is as a company and what they did with Suicide Squad, would you want them to go back and fuck with Batman Arkham Asylum or Arkham City or Arkham Knight? Because these are the same people that made a game where Harley Quinn at the very beginning goes into the locker room at the Hall of Justice sees her outfit from, what was it? I think it was from Arkham Asylum. She saw her outfit in that and said, not anymore. As if some kind of symbolic implication that, oh, that was the old her, and the old her it was terrible back then. So if the developers hate who these characters were back then, why would you want them to go back and fuck with these games that were of that time? The series that really put superhero games on the map was the Arkham trilogy. And now you want to go back and fuck with that? Because your other superhero game didn't pan out? Because you decided you wanted to shit all over one of the most beloved superheroes in all of comics? Seriously. Yeah, this is one of those cases. And like people, like I said before, during the Ghost of Yote thing, I was like, people were coming at me in the comments in that video saying, well, I don't understand what you mean by that, and you shouldn't be saying this. I don't understand what you mean because Sucker Punch couldn't have possibly changed that much. I'm like, you don't understand how much a studio can change in just 5 years. It's been 5 years since Ghost of Tsushima. And it might even be 5 or 6 before Ghost of Yote comes out. A lot changes in the studio over that time. People find new opportunities. They get, they move on to different studios. And a lot of Rocksteady, I would say most of the Rocksteady that made the Batman Arkham trilogy, they're not there anymore. They weren't there during Suicide Squad. They moved on and made their own studio. Bigwa says, I disagree. Superman 64 put hero games on the map. True. Very much true. Gio says, I'm still here. Gio, how dare you? How dare you make your presence known in my chat, sir? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So yeah, I don't have any faith in this. And it's really sad to think about that because I think about what Rocksteady was and who they are now. And you could tell the people at Rocksteady back then had a real passion for video games and for Batman. That's not who we have now. And even worse when you consider that their recent Arkham game, Arkham Shadows, was a fucking VR game. The one that everybody said was actually pretty good. This industry as itself, it's in desperate need of a reset, which I think will never happen. Although perhaps now, after the election, regardless of which side of the aisle you fall on in regards to how that went, perhaps we'll start seeing things. Well, you might see things take a turn, whether it's for the better or for the worse. Who knows? You might see people doubling down on this shit because of the election. Who knows? And Gio says, when are we getting a Static Shock video game? Never. I mean, the only people that would make it would probably be people at Warner Brothers, and you see what they do. You see what they're doing with their video games, their superhero video games right now. You see what they're doing with their video games right now. Like, if this is what they're going for, I don't even want a Static Shock superhero game. I'm good. Harry Potter was Game of the Year. Tell that to Jeff Keighley. Which I imagine you'll probably see. I don't know. You'll probably end up seeing Dragon Age there at the Game Awards. It might win some awards. I get the feeling you're probably going to see Metaphor likely win Game of the Year. Which, whatever, that's fine if it does. But a lot of the games that have come out as of late that people really liked, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see that at the Game Awards. Again, I'm not saying those games should win Game of the Year, because for people that don't know, the Game Awards is not just Game of the Year. There are lots of other categories games can win stuff in besides Game of the Year. But I imagine a lot of the games that people enjoyed this year, really enjoyed this year, probably won't reach any of those categories. They don't have to win Game of the Year, but you're probably not going to see them at the Game Awards at all. Yeah, it is what it is. That whole thing is just one big circle jerk for activists and the access media part of the industry to just, for a more vulgar way to describe it, to basically suck each other off, and for Keighley to continue to put Kojima on that stage and to suck him off too. That's kind of what the Game Awards are. Oh, and to bring on celebrities and movie stars and shit like that, while also not realizing that people have kind of fallen off when it comes to celebrities. So you bring a celebrity out on stage, it's not going to gain you any favor because people don't really care that much about celebrities that much anymore. So that's also not doing you any favors. Like, is this a thing for gamers, or is this just you being happy that you can reach out to Hollywood and drag people from whatever they're doing onto the stage of the Game Awards? Because that's what it seems to feel like. But all right, do I have anything else here to talk about? I think that's it. I think that's all the articles I want to talk about today. Anyways, this Batman one was one I kind of thrown at the last second because this information just came out relatively recent about the whole Batman thing, and that shit really set me off. I'm like, yo, you can't keep doing this to Batman. You can't, Rocksteady, please. And from what I understand is that they kind of pulled off a lot of the people that were working on Suicide Squad after they laid a bunch of them off to go work on I guess it's like a director's cut version of the Harry Potter game, and then also working on the sequel to that Harry Potter game. And then a lot of them are also working on, what's left over is probably working on these Batman games. And that's just not a good sign overall. But I'll put it to you this way. If Metaphor does win Game of the Year, it goes back into the idea that Asia and the Asian market, or the Asian video game development scene, is the scene that is carrying this industry. Why did the director cut content from a Harry Potter game inside a movie? tell that to Death Stranding and Ghost of Tsushima with their director's cuts. Like, oh, by the way, here's these director's cuts for these games. We're adding nothing to them about cut content. Just looking at this. I just remember they did in fact put Harley Quinn's outfit back in Suicide Squad. I remember that shit now. So recently they put that outfit she hated back in the game and gave you an option to get it. But the outfit is so like neutered and tame that people are like, what the fuck is this? People were insulted by it. And if you were to go over to I'm looking at what the numbers are for Suicide Squad right now. What do we got? You got 225 players playing it right now. And I think that might have been an increase for the fact that that the news about them adding those characters to the game happened. But yeah, this is where you're at right now with Suicide Squad. That's where we're at. And if you look at it from the max, you see just how hard that game dropped. This is right around when it released. We're talking 13,000 players, and you could just see the sharp drop as time went on. And it just got worse and worse. This spike, I think, was when the Joker thing happened. The update for the Joker DLC that came out, which was also a disappointment. And it just flatlined after that. Never went back up. $200 million for that game. Wasted. Because you decided you wanted to make a live service game based on the Batman Arkham universe, or exists within that, which is about people shooting shit, and then you turned around and insulted one of the most beloved characters beloved characters in comic books because you decided that you wanted to be your what's the word I'm looking for? I'm drawing a blank. Wanted to be your woke activist self. There you go. Like a better way to put it. It's like this. Trying to find like a much more meaningful term to describe it, but honestly, that's all you can describe it as. This the woke activist shit, and that's what it is. That's what it is. 12 viewers on Twitch right now. But hold on. I can't spell. Now, the game is sitting at 59,000 players right now. These are obviously weekend numbers, of course. Sitting at a paltry 5, almost 6,000 viewers on Twitch right now. Now, just a few days ago, I saw the game sitting at roughly 20,000 viewers on Twitch. So what happened? And it's the weekend, so obviously people got time, right? Or you would think people got time. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously I have the game as well. And I'm debating whether or not I'm going to finish it. Maybe I will because I'm already stuck into it. I'm stuck into it now that I can't, refund it. So maybe I'll go back and play some more of it. Maybe I'll just do it off stream. I don't know. But right now it's just not. It ain't making me happy. What happened here? What is this? What are these weird dips? What happened here? It was on the 5th. Was that weird shop drop there? Why is it cut off? Oh, was that because... Nah. It wouldn't have had that effect, right? Like, is that because of the election? It wouldn't have had that effect, though. I don't know. Whatever. Anyways. Just going through my notes here. Was there anything else I want to talk about before I get out of here? Wrap this thing up? I don't think so. I think that's about it. Yeah, that's all I got. Anyways, want to catch this thing from the beginning? You have to go back and watch the archive. They uninstalled it in protest. Yeah, it's like that. It was really late at that time, so maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, it's just weird that kind of happened on the day of the election, so who knows? I don't know what that was, but it is weird. All right, anyways, that's all I got for now, guys. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Like I said, if you want to catch this thing from the beginning, you can watch the archive. I'm not dual streaming this on YouTube because OBS and I have had a hell of a time getting this thing set up. If I don't sound exhausted from that shit already, trust me, I am. Yeah, we talked about a bunch of shit today, so you can watch the archive from the beginning. I'll probably upload the archive of this up on YouTube for those that want to watch it there as well. And a lot of people tend to watch more stuff on YouTube than on Twitch because it's just easier to get access to. So this will go up there as well. But yeah, thanks guys for tuning in. Obviously, if you got questions or shit you want to talk about, you know where to find me. I'm always on Discord. I mean, I have Twitter. I'm never really on Twitter like that because I really don't care for social media like that. I don't care if it's Twitter or X. I don't care if it's Blue Sky, whatever. I just don't care for social media like that. But I have accounts there, and if I see people trying to reach out to me, I will be more than happy to answer questions or talk about stuff. You know how to reach me. But yeah. So until next week, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of The Rundown. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys next week. Guys, enjoy your weekend. I'm out of this bitch. This was social media we need. Honestly, if that was the only social media that I ever used, I'd be okay with that. I can stay within my community and talk to you guys. I'm totally okay with that. Even though that would be considered a bubble, but we all have differing opinions in my community, so maybe it's not that big of a bubble. Anyways, I'm out of here, guys. Take care. Thanks for watching. I'm out of here. Deuces. Fade to black. Fade to black. Where's it at? Fade to black. Fade to black.